Up to 44% of eating disorder diagnoses now fall into OST presentations, cases that don't look like traditional anorexia or bulimia. These are the eating disorders hiding in plain sight, disguised as wellness routines, productivity hacks, and self-optimization practices. Recent studies show that social media-driven body optimization behaviors are triggering subtle disordered eating patterns that most people don't recognize as problematic until they're deeply entrenched. The fastest growing demographic isn't who you'd expect, and the triggers aren't traditional body image issues. Instead, they're rooted in productivity culture, biohacking trends, and the relentless pursuit of peak performance. The symptoms are so normalized in our optimization-obsessed society that even healthcare providers miss them. But the real shock isn't who's affected, it's how we've been counting cases completely wrong. The hidden epidemic statistics don't show. Our criteria still focus on dramatic extremes, skipping meals, purging, that were common in the 80s and 90s. Back then, researchers focused on extreme restriction and purging behaviors that were obvious and dramatic. But the eating disorders dominating 2025 don't fit these outdated patterns at all. Studies show Instagram's feed intensifies restrictive eating content within weeks, driving escalation in disordered behaviors. These systems learn your vulnerabilities and feed you increasingly extreme content about food restriction, body optimization, and wellness practices. A person might start by watching a simple meal prep video, but within weeks, their feed becomes saturated with content about elimination diets, fasting protocols, and body transformation challenges. Wellness culture has created an entirely new language around food restriction that makes disordered behaviors sound healthy and aspirational. Terms like clean eating and food freedom mask underlying pathology because they frame restriction as virtue. When someone eliminates entire food groups due to sensory sensitivities or rigid rules about contamination, they might actually be experiencing ARFID, avoidance/restrictive food intake disorder, which affects 0.5 to 5% of the population, but looks nothing like traditional anorexia. These cases involve complex food rules that have nothing to do with body image, but still cause significant nutritional and social impairment. The reality is that most people struggling with eating disorders in 2025 don't look anything like the traditional anorexia or bulimia presentations that mental health professionals were trained to recognize. They're high-functioning individuals who maintain normal weights while engaging in complex food rules and restriction patterns. They might eat regularly in social situations, but privately follow rigid protocols about meal timing, food combinations, or caloric distribution. Their behaviors are often praised by friends and colleagues as examples of discipline and health consciousness. Traditional criteria miss high-functioning cases that maintain normal weight through OST behaviors, which account for approximately 44% of diagnoses. These individuals might never skip a meal, but still have rigid rules about food timing, portion sizes, or ingredient quality that significantly impact their quality of life. They present with fatigue, difficulty concentrating, or social withdrawal. But if they're maintaining a normal weight and eating regular meals, the possibility of an eating disorder might never be considered. Productivity tracking apps are inadvertently creating food restriction patterns by gamifying nutrition and eating behaviors. These apps reward users for hitting specific targets, maintaining streaks, and achieving perfect days of eating. The psychological reward systems built into these platforms can trigger obsessive behaviors in vulnerable individuals. Users report feeling anxiety when they can't log their food, guilt when they exceed their targets, and a sense of failure when they break their tracking streaks. The intermittent fasting and biohacking communities have created spaces where extreme food restriction is not only normalized, but actively encouraged. Members share increasingly restrictive protocols, celebrate extended fasting periods, and dismiss hunger cues as weakness to be overcome. These communities provide social validation for behaviors that would typically trigger concern from friends and family members. The scientific language used to describe these practices makes them seem legitimate and evidence-based, even when they're causing significant harm. Statistical data from 2025 reveals that eating disorders now affect approximately 15% of the adult population when researchers account for these modern presentations. Among college-aged individuals, the prevalence jumps to nearly 25%. The highest rates of increase are found in demographics that were previously considered low risk. Professional men aged 25 to 45, parents juggling work. and family responsibilities, and individuals in health-focused careers like fitness training and nutrition counseling. Traditional screening tools are failing to identify these modern presentations because they were designed to catch extreme behaviors like severe restriction or frequent purging. Current assessment questionnaires ask about specific behaviors like skipping meals or vomiting after eating, but they don't capture the subtle control patterns that characterize modern eating disorders. The assessment tools also fail to account for the psychological distress that comes with modern food obsession. Healthcare providers are struggling to recognize these presentations because they don't match the clinical training most received about eating disorders. The focus on optimization and wellness makes these behaviors seem healthy rather than concerning. The language that people use to describe their eating behaviors has also evolved in ways that mask the underlying pathology. Instead of saying they're restricting calories, they might describe themselves as eating intuitively or listening to their body. Instead of acknowledging food rules, they might talk about lifestyle choices or personal preferences. Insurance systems and healthcare institutions are still operating under the assumption that eating disorders are relatively rare conditions that primarily affect young women. This leads to inadequate screening protocols and insufficient resources for treatment. Many healthcare providers receive minimal training about eating disorders, and the training they do receive focuses on traditional presentations rather than the complex modern variations that are becoming increasingly common. The impact of this measurement problem extends beyond individual diagnosis and treatment. Research funding is allocated based on official prevalence statistics, which means that the true scope of the problem is dramatically underestimated. Treatment programs are designed for the minority of cases that fit traditional criteria, leaving the majority of people struggling with modern eating disorders without appropriate resources or support. The actual number of people affected by eating disorders in 2025 is nearly triple what official statistics report because we're measuring behaviors that represent only a small fraction of the total problem. When researchers account for optimization obsession, technology-driven food control, and the subtle restriction patterns that characterize modern presentations, the true prevalence becomes clear. The eating disorder epidemic isn't coming. It's already here, hidden in plain sight behind the language of wellness and optimization. But there's one demographic driving this hidden epidemic that researchers never saw coming: the very people who seem to have it all together. When optimization becomes obsession, achievement-oriented professionals are developing a specific type of eating disorder that emerges directly from self-improvement culture. This condition doesn't involve traditional restriction or purging behaviors. Instead, it centers around an obsessive need to optimize every aspect of food intake and physical performance. The people who develop this disorder are often praised for their discipline and dedication, which makes the underlying pathology nearly impossible to detect. New research shows fitness tracking apps fuel an obsession with metabolic flexibility that looks healthy but masks disordered patterns. This represents a new psychological mechanism that connects the drive for peak performance with food control behaviors. The anxiety stems from the belief that any deviation from perfect nutritional protocols will result in decreased performance, lost opportunities, or personal failure. The anxiety becomes so intense that people experience physical symptoms like rapid heartbeat, sweating, and panic when they can't follow their optimization routines. Food becomes a source of constant stress rather than nourishment, but the anxiety is rationalized as necessary for achieving goals. The same mindset that drives people to optimize their work schedules, maximize their output, and eliminate inefficiencies gets applied to their physical selves. Bodies become machines that need to be fine-tuned, upgraded, and maintained for optimal performance. This mechanical view of the human body strips away the natural, intuitive aspects of eating and replaces them with rigid protocols and systematic approaches. The language of productivity culture has infiltrated nutrition in ways that make disordered behaviors sound reasonable and scientific. People talk about fuel efficiency, performance optimization, and metabolic hacking instead of simply eating meals. They describe hunger as a design flaw to be overcome rather than a natural biological signal. This technical language creates emotional distance from the experience of eating and makes it easier to ignore physical and psychological discomfort. Meal timing protocols have evolved into socially acceptable forms of food restriction that can become severely pathological. What starts as research-based approaches to eating windows and circadian rhythm optimization can quickly become rigid rules that dominate daily life. People might eat only during specific 4-hour windows, refuse food outside these times even when hungry, and experience intense anxiety when their timing is disrupted by social events or work demands. The scientific rationale makes these behaviors seem healthy and evidence-based rather than restrictive. Macro counting represents another form of socially acceptable restriction that can become obsessive and harmful. The practice involves calculating precise amounts of protein, carbohydrates, and fats needed for optimal performance or body composition. People might weigh every ingredient, track every macro to the gram, and feel distressed when they can't calculate exact values. One survey found 23% of users of diet apps reported anxiety when skipping logs, an early warning sign of pathological tracking. The focus shifts from enjoying food to hitting numerical targets, and meals become mathematical exercises rather than nourishing experiences. Performance nutrition takes optimization to an extreme level by treating food purely as a tool for achieving specific outcomes. Athletes and fitness enthusiasts might eat only foods that serve particular performance functions, eliminating anything that doesn't contribute to their goals. This approach can lead to severely limited food choices, social isolation around eating, and intense guilt when consuming foods that don't fit the performance criteria. The pursuit of peak performance becomes more important than psychological well-being or social connections. Achievement-oriented individuals are particularly vulnerable to optimization disorders because they apply the same perfectionist standards to their eating that they use in other areas of life. These people are accustomed to setting ambitious goals, tracking progress meticulously, and pushing through discomfort to achieve results. When this mindset gets applied to nutrition and fitness, it can create unsustainable standards that lead to physical and psychological burnout. The same drive that makes them successful in their careers can become destructive when applied to their relationship with food. Data tracking plays a central role in creating obsessive food behaviors by turning eating into a constant monitoring and evaluation process. Apps and devices provide detailed feedback about every aspect of nutrition and metabolism, creating an addictive cycle of measurement and adjustment. People become dependent on external validation from their tracking systems rather than internal cues about hunger, fullness, and satisfaction. The constant data stream creates anxiety when numbers don't meet expectations and reinforces the belief that optimization requires constant vigilance. Traditional eating disorder symptoms become completely masked when they're described using optimization language. Food restriction becomes metabolic flexibility training. Anxiety around eating becomes performance awareness. Social isolation due to rigid food rules becomes prioritizing health goals. The clinical presentations that mental health professionals are trained to recognize are hidden behind scientific terminology and self-improvement concepts. The physical consequences of chronic optimization behaviors can be severe and long-lasting. Constant restriction and rigid meal timing can disrupt hormonal balance, leading to irregular menstrual cycles, decreased bone density, and compromised immune function. The stress of maintaining perfect optimization routines elevates cortisol levels, which can actually impair the performance that people are trying to enhance. Sleep quality often suffers when people are constantly anxious about their food choices and tracking compliance. Psychological consequences include increased anxiety, depression, and social withdrawal. People become so focused on their optimization protocols that they lose the ability to eat intuitively or enjoy food socially. Relationships suffer when rigid food rules prevent normal social interactions around meals. The constant self-monitoring and evaluation creates a critical internal voice that extends beyond food into other areas of life. The social validation that comes from optimization behaviors makes recovery particularly challenging. Friends, family members, and colleagues often praise the discipline and dedication that characterize these disorders. Social media amplifies this validation through likes, comments, and shares when people post about their optimization routines. The positive feedback reinforces the disordered behaviors and makes it difficult for people to recognize that their relationship with food has become problematic. Professional environments often encourage and reward optimization behaviors, especially in high-achieving careers. Companies promote wellness programs that emphasize tracking, goal setting, and performance enhancement. The professional benefits of appearing disciplined and health-conscious can make people reluctant to change their optimization behaviors, even when they're causing distress. The pursuit of peak performance is creating a generation of high-functioning individuals with severe eating disorders that go completely unrecognized because their symptoms are celebrated rather than treated as concerning behaviors. But this optimization obsession isn't affecting everyone equally. One demographic is experiencing increases that have caught researchers completely off guard. The male eating disorder crisis no one talks about. While eating disorders still affect more women, new data confirm rising rates among men. ARFID now represents 39.5% of male cases in recent US studies. This statistic challenges everything we thought we knew about who develops these conditions and when they typically emerge. The behaviors driving this trend aren't the restriction patterns or purging episodes that characterize traditional eating disorder presentations. Instead, they center around muscle obsession, performance enhancement, and control-seeking behaviors that are often praised as examples of masculine discipline and dedication. Traditional eating disorder research has systematically excluded men from study populations for decades, creating massive gaps in understanding how these conditions manifest across different demographics. Early research focused almost exclusively on young women, particularly college-aged individuals who fit specific diagnostic criteria. This narrow focus meant that the unique ways men experience and express eating disorders were never properly documented or understood. The diagnostic criteria that emerged from this research were based on female presentations, making it nearly impossible to identify male cases that didn't fit these established patterns. The exclusion of men from eating disorder research created a self-perpetuating cycle where healthcare providers weren't trained to recognize male presentations, leading to misdiagnoses and reinforcing the misconception that these conditions rarely affected men. Medical schools and training programs continued to teach eating disorders as primarily female conditions, leaving providers unprepared to identify the warning signs in male patients. This systematic oversight has contributed to the current crisis, where men are developing eating disorders at unprecedented rates, but receiving little recognition or appropriate treatment. Called reverse anorexia, men pursue muscle mass through rigid diets and steroids, behaviors often praised rather than treated as pathology. This presentation involves an intense preoccupation with becoming bigger and more muscular, even when the person has already achieved significant muscle development. Men might spend hours each day in the gym, follow extremely rigid workout schedules, and experience severe distress when they can't maintain their exercise routines. The focus on gaining muscle, rather than losing weight, makes these behaviors appear healthy and goal-oriented to outside observers. Performance enhancement becomes a pathway to disordered eating when men become obsessed with optimizing their physical capabilities for work, sports, or general fitness goals. This might involve following extreme dietary protocols designed to increase energy, improve focus, or enhance physical performance. Men might eliminate entire food groups, time their meals to precise windows, or consume only foods that serve specific performance functions. The rational, goal-oriented nature of these behaviors makes them seem reasonable and evidence-based rather than pathological. Workplace stress and midlife pressures create unique vulnerabilities for men over 35 who turn to food and exercise control as coping mechanisms. The professional demands of advancing careers, financial responsibilities, and family obligations can create overwhelming stress levels that men feel ill-equipped to handle through traditional emotional outlets. Controlling food intake and exercise routines becomes a way to manage anxiety and assert control over at least one aspect of their lives. The discipline required to maintain strict eating and exercise protocols can provide a sense of accomplishment and mastery during periods of professional or personal uncertainty. The intersection of male identity crisis and body control behaviors is particularly pronounced during midlife transitions. Men facing career changes, relationship challenges, or aging-related concerns might turn to extreme fitness and nutrition protocols as a way to reclaim their sense of masculinity and control. The physical changes that come with aging, such as decreased muscle mass and increased body fat, can trigger intense anxiety about losing masculine attributes. Food, restriction, and excessive exercise become ways to fight against these natural changes and maintain a sense of youthful vitality. Supplement culture has created normalized pathways to disordered eating behaviors among men. The fitness industry promotes an endless array of powders, pills, and specialized nutrition products designed to enhance performance and physique. Men might replace regular meals with protein shakes, consume dangerous amounts of pre-workout stimulants, or follow complex supplementation protocols that require precise timing and dosing. The scientific marketing language used to promote these products makes extreme behaviors seem legitimate and necessary for achieving fitness goals. Men are significantly less likely to seek help for eating disorders because these conditions are still widely perceived as female problems. The stigma associated with having a women's condition prevents many men from recognizing their behaviors as problematic or seeking appropriate treatment. Male culture often emphasizes self-reliance and emotional stoicism, making it difficult for men to admit they need help with issues related to food and body image. The language used to describe eating disorders often focuses on concerns about being too thin or wanting to be smaller, which doesn't resonate with men whose goals center around building muscle and increasing size. The symptoms that appear in men often differ dramatically from traditional female presentations, making diagnosis challenging even when men do seek help. Men might not restrict overall food intake, but instead become obsessed with consuming specific amounts of protein or eliminating certain food groups. They might not purge through vomiting, but instead engage in excessive exercise or use dangerous substances to increase metabolism. The focus on muscle building rather than weight loss means that men might actually gain weight while developing severe eating disorders, contradicting the expectations of healthcare providers who associate these conditions with weight loss. The normalization of extreme behaviors within masculine culture means that even healthcare providers often miss the signs of eating disorders in men. Behaviors like spending hours in the gym, following rigid meal plans, and eliminating entire food groups are often praised as examples of discipline and dedication, rather than recognized as potential symptoms of psychological distress. The cultural expectation that men should be physically strong and emotionally resilient makes it difficult for providers to identify when these behaviors have become pathological. Men are developing eating disorders at unprecedented rates, but the symptoms are so normalized in masculine culture that even healthcare providers miss them, leaving thousands of men struggling with serious psychological conditions that go unrecognized and untreated. But there's another factor driving this epidemic that's affecting everyone equally: the very devices we carry in our pockets every day. Technology's role in modern food obsession. Smartphones have fundamentally rewired our relationship with food in ways that would have been impossible to predict just a decade ago. These devices, originally designed to improve communication and access to information, have become powerful tools that can trigger and maintain eating disorder behaviors. The constant connectivity and instant access to food-related content creates an environment where obsessive thoughts about eating can be reinforced and amplified 24 hours a day. Food tracking apps represent one of the most significant technological contributions to modern eating disorders. These applications promise to help users make healthier choices by providing detailed information about calorie intake, macro ratios, and nutritional content. However, the psychological impact of constant monitoring can be profound and harmful. Users report feeling unable to eat anything without first logging it in their app, creating a dependency on external validation rather than internal hunger cues. The detailed breakdown of every meal into numerical components removes the natural, intuitive aspects of eating and replaces them with mathematical calculations. Diet and fitness applications are marketed as health tools, but emerging research suggests a significant link between their use and disordered eating symptomology. Studies have found that disordered eating symptoms are higher in young adults who use these apps compared to non-users, with symptoms increasing based on frequency of use. The process of constant calorie counting and macro tracking creates a psychological state where food becomes reduced to numbers rather than nourishment. Users might spend significant portions of their day calculating whether they can afford to eat certain foods based on their remaining calorie budget. Frequent social media use correlates with elevated eating disorder risk. App users show higher disordered eating scores than non-users. Research has documented how algorithm-driven systems can rapidly escalate normal interest in health and fitness into pathological obsession. Nearly half of teens aged 13 to 17 report feeling worse about their body image due to social media exposure. The correlation between social media use and eating disorder development is particularly strong, with individuals spending over 3 hours daily on these platforms being twice as likely to develop eating disorders compared to those with less screen time. Social media algorithms have created a particularly insidious pathway for eating disorder development and maintenance. These systems learn from user behavior and gradually increase exposure to more extreme content related to food restriction, body transformation, and wellness practices. A person might begin by following general health accounts, but the algorithm quickly identifies their engagement patterns and begins serving increasingly restrictive content. The personalized nature of these feeds makes users feel like they're receiving customized advice, rather than recognizing they're being shown content designed to maximize engagement. Food tracking apps incorporate gamification features that can become addictive and harmful. Users earn points for consistent logging, maintain streaks for meeting daily goals, and receive badges for achieving specific milestones. These game-like elements trigger reward pathways in the brain similar to those involved in gambling and other addictive behaviors. The psychological satisfaction of maintaining perfect tracking records can become more important than actual health outcomes. The apps often include social features that allow users to compete with friends or share their progress publicly. This social component can create additional pressure to maintain restrictive behaviors to avoid disappointing others or appearing less dedicated. Users report feeling accountable to their app communities in ways that can override their own physical and psychological needs. Technology has systematically removed intuitive eating practices and replaced them with external validation systems. Instead of learning to recognize hunger, fullness, and satisfaction cues, users become dependent on their apps to tell them when and what to eat. This technological mediation of basic biological functions can disrupt natural eating patterns and create anxiety when the external systems aren't available. The constant stream of nutritional information can overwhelm users' ability to make simple food choices. Apps often provide conflicting information about optimal nutrition, leading to confusion and paralysis when trying to decide what to eat. The pressure to make perfect choices based on incomplete or conflicting data can create significant stress around meal times. Applications trigger perfectionist and control-seeking behaviors through their design features and feedback systems. The detailed tracking capabilities allow users to monitor minute changes in their intake and body measurements, creating opportunities for obsessive monitoring. Users might weigh food to the gram, calculate precise macro ratios, and adjust their intake based on minor fluctuations in tracking data. The apps often include features that predict future outcomes based on current behaviors, such as projected weight loss or muscle gain. These predictions can create anxiety when progress doesn't match expectations and can motivate increasingly restrictive behaviors to achieve predicted results. The focus on future outcomes, rather than present well-being, can perpetuate harmful restriction patterns. Online communities centered around food tracking and fitness can provide both support and harmful enablement of disordered eating behaviors. These communities often share tips for increasing restriction, maintaining motivation during difficult periods, and hiding disordered behaviors from family and friends. The peer support can make harmful behaviors feel normal and acceptable. The paternalistic communication style that often emerges in these online spaces can be particularly harmful. Some community members adopt authoritarian roles, providing rigid rules and guidelines for other users to follow. This dynamic creates hierarchical relationships where individuals surrender their autonomy to external authorities rather than developing their own healthy relationship with food. The technology designed to make us healthier is actually creating widespread food obsession and disconnection from natural hunger cues, turning millions of people into data-driven eating machines who have lost touch with their body's natural wisdom about nourishment and satisfaction. But the most concerning aspect of this technological influence isn't the extreme cases that make headlines. It's the subtle, everyday behaviors that have become so normalized that most people don't recognize them as symptoms of a serious psychological condition. The OST majority, why most cases go undiagnosed. These normalized behaviors mask the most common eating disorder diagnosis, one that affects more people than anorexia and bulimia combined, yet remains largely invisible to both patients and healthcare providers. Other specified feeding or eating disorders, or OSFD, accounts for 44.2% of eating disorder diagnoses in females and 39.5% in males, making it the largest category of eating disorders in 2025. Despite its prevalence, OSFD was specifically designed to be a catch-all category for eating disorders that don't fit the precise criteria for anorexia or bulimia, creating massive problems for recognition and treatment. ARFID encompasses a wide range of behaviors that share concerns about eating, body shape, and weight, along with various disordered eating patterns that cause significant distress. The category includes conditions like purging disorder and atypical anorexia, conditions affecting more people than anorexia itself. Atypical anorexia involves all the psychological and behavioral symptoms of anorexia, but without the characteristic low body weight, while purging disorder involves regular compensatory behaviors without the binge episodes that characterize bulimia. Night eating syndrome represents another presentation where people consume significant amounts of their daily calories during evening hours, creating distress and interfering with normal functioning. Modern lifestyle pressures have created new ARFID presentations that weren't recognized when diagnostic criteria were originally developed. The rise of flexible dieting approaches has led to presentations where people follow seemingly reasonable eating plans, but experience significant psychological distress when they deviate from their protocols. The intuitive eating movement has paradoxically created another pathway where people become obsessed with eating intuitively and develop anxiety when they can't perfectly identify their hunger and fullness cues. These behaviors cause significant impairment in daily functioning, but don't fit traditional eating disorder categories. ARFID cases are frequently dismissed as lifestyle choices rather than recognized as serious psychological disorders because the behaviors often appear reasonable or even healthy to outside observers. Someone with atypical anorexia might be praised for their discipline and healthy eating habits, while their internal experience involves constant anxiety about food and weight. The disconnect between external appearances and internal distress makes it difficult for both individuals and healthcare providers to recognize the need for treatment. The vague diagnostic criteria create significant challenges for treatment, research, and healthcare coverage. Healthcare providers must develop individualized treatment approaches for each person, which requires extensive assessment and ongoing adjustment of interventions. The lack of specific diagnostic criteria makes it difficult to determine when treatment is needed and what approaches are most likely to be effective. Scientists have difficulty studying ARFID because the category is so broad and diverse, limiting the development of evidence-based treatments and contributing to ongoing challenges in providing effective care. Insurance companies often refuse to cover treatment for ARFID because the symptoms don't meet the clear criteria required for coverage approval. This creates barriers to accessing appropriate care and forces many people to pay out of pocket for treatment or go without help entirely. The financial barriers compound the diagnostic challenges and leave many people struggling with serious eating disorders without adequate support. Healthcare provider training programs typically focus on the clear diagnostic criteria for anorexia and bulimia, leaving providers unprepared to recognize and treat ARFID presentations. The subtle nature of many ARFID symptoms requires sophisticated clinical skills and extensive knowledge about the diverse ways eating disorders can manifest. Many providers lack this specialized training, which contributes to the high rates of missed diagnoses and inadequate treatment. The behaviors that qualify as ARFID in modern contexts have expanded to include technology-driven food obsession, optimization-focused restriction patterns, and wellness culture-influenced eating rules. Someone might spend hours each day tracking their food intake, experience anxiety when they can't log their meals perfectly, and feel distressed when their eating doesn't align with their chosen optimization protocols. Different demographics experience ARFID presentations in unique ways that reflect their specific cultural and lifestyle pressures, with young professionals developing it through productivity-focused eating patterns, while athletes experience it through performance-focused nutrition approaches that gradually become restrictive and anxiety-provoking. The one-year prevalence of ARFID is 1.18% for females and 0.27% for males, indicating that millions of people are affected by this condition. These numbers likely underestimate the true prevalence because many ARFID cases go undiagnosed due to their subtle presentations and the challenges in recognizing them. The eating disorder affecting the most people in 2025 is specifically designed to be vague, leaving millions without proper diagnosis or treatment while their symptoms are dismissed as personal choices rather than serious psychological conditions. This diagnostic invisibility has created a perfect storm where the most common eating disorders go unrecognized and untreated. But the problem extends beyond misdiagnoses. The same normalization that makes ARFID invisible has opened the door to increasingly dangerous behaviors that involve not just food restriction, but the misuse of powerful medications originally designed to treat serious medical conditions. Bulimia and pharmaceutical misuse in 2025. People are now using prescription medications designed to treat serious medical conditions as tools for weight loss, creating a dangerous intersection between pharmaceutical access and eating disorder behaviors. This trend represents a fundamental shift in how disordered eating manifests in 2025, moving beyond traditional food restriction and purging into the realm of medical intervention misuse. The availability of powerful medications through both legitimate and illegitimate channels has created new pathways for people to engage in harmful weight control behaviors while believing they're taking a safer, more scientific approach to managing their bodies. Bulimia has evolved significantly beyond its original manifestation in the diabetic community and now represents a broader pattern of medication misuse for weight control. The term originally described the practice of insulin restriction among people with type 1 diabetes, but the underlying psychology of using medical interventions to manipulate weight has spread to other populations and other types of medications. About 20% of women with T1DM report insulin omission to lose weight, making Bulimia one of the top weight loss behaviors. This practice allows individuals to eat whatever they want while still losing weight quickly and easily, creating an obsessive cycle that can become extremely difficult to break. The motives behind insulin restriction involve complex psychological factors that extend beyond simple weight loss goals. Many people describe feeling a sense of control over their bodies that diabetes had previously taken away from them. The ability to manipulate their blood sugar and weight through insulin restriction provides a feeling of empowerment that can become addictive. Others report using insulin restriction as a form of escape from the daily challenges and restrictions that come with managing diabetes. The immediate weight loss results reinforce the behavior and make it extremely difficult to stop, even when people understand the serious health consequences. The rise of prescription drug misuse for weight loss has expanded dramatically with the introduction of GLP-1 agonists like semaglutide and liraglutide. These medications were originally developed to treat type 2 diabetes, but have shown significant effects on weight loss, leading to their approval for obesity treatment in certain populations. However, people without diabetes or obesity are now seeking these medications specifically for weight loss purposes, often obtaining them through online pharmacies, medical spas, or by exaggerating their symptoms to healthcare providers. The medications work by slowing gastric emptying and affecting appetite regulation, creating dramatic weight loss results that can be extremely appealing to people with eating disorders. Social media has played a crucial role in normalizing pharmaceutical approaches to weight control by creating communities where people share their experiences with various medications and strategies for obtaining them. Platforms like TikTok and Instagram feature countless posts about weight loss medications, with users documenting their results and providing advice about dosing, side effects, and sources for obtaining prescriptions. This content creates the impression that using pharmaceuticals for weight loss is safe, effective, and socially acceptable. The scientific language used to describe these medications makes them seem more legitimate and less dangerous than traditional eating disorder behaviors. Studies link insulin restriction to a threefold increased risk of death due to DKA. It's a high mortality condition. Insulin restriction can lead to diabetic ketoacidosis, a dangerous condition where the blood becomes acidic due to high levels of ketones. This can cause serious long-term complications, including retinopathy, which can lead to vision loss, nephropathy resulting in kidney damage, and peripheral neuropathy causing nerve damage. The intentional restriction of insulin can significantly reduce life expectancy, with some studies suggesting that people who engage in Bulimia may have a life expectancy reduced by up to 13 years, compared to those who manage their diabetes appropriately. GLP-1 agonist misuse creates different, but equally serious health risks. These medications can cause severe gastrointestinal side effects, including nausea, vomiting, and gastroparesis, a condition where the stomach empties too slowly. People who use these medications without proper medical supervision may experience dangerous electrolyte imbalances, dehydration, and nutritional deficiencies. The rapid weight loss achieved through these medications can also trigger or worsen existing eating disorders, creating a cycle where people become dependent on pharmaceutical interventions to maintain their weight loss. The obesity medication boom has created entirely new pathways to disordered eating by making pharmaceutical weight loss interventions more accessible and socially acceptable. The approval of several new weight loss medications in recent years has led to increased media coverage and public awareness of pharmaceutical options for weight management. This increased availability has made it easier for people with eating disorders to access powerful medications that can facilitate extreme weight loss without the traditional restriction behaviors that might be more obvious to family members and healthcare providers. Pharmaceutical misuse is particularly dangerous in eating disorder contexts because it can mask the underlying psychological issues while creating new medical complications. People who use medications for weight loss may believe they're addressing their eating disorder through medical intervention, but they're actually avoiding the psychological work necessary for recovery. The medications can provide temporary relief from the anxiety and distress associated with eating disorders, but they don't address the underlying thoughts and behaviors that drive these conditions. This can lead to a false sense of progress, while the eating disorder continues to worsen underneath the pharmaceutical intervention. The demographics most affected by medication-related eating disorders include young adults with access to healthcare or disposable income, professionals in high-pressure careers who view pharmaceutical intervention as efficient and scientific, and individuals with concurrent medical conditions who have legitimate access to medications that can be misused. Women with type 1 diabetes remain at particularly high risk, with studies showing that 69% of participants with Dubelmia reported negative experiences with medical professionals, highlighting the lack of understanding and support available for this population. The rise in prescription stimulant use for attention disorders has also created new opportunities for pharmaceutical misuse, as these medications can suppress appetite and facilitate weight loss. Healthcare providers are struggling to identify pharmaceutical misuse because patients often present with legitimate medical concerns or requests that make it difficult to distinguish between appropriate medication use and disordered eating behaviors. People seeking weight loss medications may exaggerate their symptoms or medical history to qualify for prescriptions, making it challenging for providers to assess the true medical necessity. The rapid expansion of telemedicine and online prescribing has made it easier for people to obtain medications without thorough evaluation, creating additional challenges for appropriate screening and monitoring. The explosion of weight loss medications has created entirely new categories of eating disorders that are potentially more dangerous than traditional presentations because they involve medical interventions that can cause serious physical complications while masking the underlying psychological distress. But not all eating disorders are driven by the desire to lose weight or change body appearance. There's an entire category of restrictive eating that stems from completely different psychological and neurological mechanisms. ARFID and sensory-based eating disorders. ARFID affects 0.5 to 5% of the population and represents a fundamentally different category of eating restriction driven by neurological differences rather than body image concerns. Unlike other eating disorders, people with avoidance/restrictive food intake disorder often want to eat normally and gain weight, but their brains process food sensations as genuine threats, creating involuntary barriers that make eating certain foods physically or psychologically impossible. The condition is characterized by a persistent failure to meet nutritional or energy needs, which can lead to significant consequences, including the need for medical interventions like feeding tubes or nutritional supplements. Individuals with ARFID do not have body image distortion or a drive for thinness. Instead, their issues stem from the act of eating itself, whether that involves a lack of interest in food, sensory sensitivities, or fears of adverse consequences from eating. Sensory processing issues create some of the most challenging presentations of ARFID. People with sensory-based food restriction experience certain textures, flavors, smells, or visual aspects of food as genuinely threatening or repulsive. This isn't simply being picky about food preferences. The sensory experience of eating specific foods can trigger intense physical reactions, including gagging, nausea, or panic responses. These reactions are involuntary and can't be overcome through willpower or gradual exposure without proper therapeutic intervention. Nausea from certain textures leads 70% of ARFID cases to rely on supplements to meet their nutritional needs. The texture-based restrictions are particularly challenging because they can eliminate entire food groups from someone's diet, leading to nutritional deficiencies that affect physical and cognitive development. People with ARFID might avoid all foods with certain textures, such as anything soft, crunchy, or mixed textures. This can lead to diets that consist of only a few safe foods, often processed items that lack essential nutrients. Adult presentations of ARFID often differ significantly from childhood manifestations. While children with ARFID might have obvious growth delays or dramatic food restrictions, adults have often developed sophisticated coping mechanisms that mask their eating difficulties. Adult ARFID might manifest as someone who can only eat foods prepared in specific ways, avoids social eating situations, or has developed elaborate rituals around food preparation and consumption. These adults might maintain normal weights through careful selection of tolerated foods, making their condition less obvious to healthcare providers. The connection between neurodivergence and ARFID development is particularly strong and well documented. About 50% of ARFID diagnoses co-occur with other psychiatric and neurodevelopmental disorders. Common comorbid conditions include anxiety disorders, autism spectrum disorder, and attention deficit/hyperactivity disorder. Over 70% of those with ARFID also have an anxiety diagnosis, making it the most common comorbid condition. Research has revealed that ARFID may be highly heritable, with genetics explaining about 79% of the likelihood of developing the condition. This means that nearly 80% of the likelihood of developing ARFID can be attributed to genetic factors rather than environmental influences. This research reinforces that ARFID is not simply a behavioral choice or a result of personal preference, but has a strong biological foundation that affects how the nervous system processes eating experiences. ARFID is frequently misunderstood as picky eating or lifestyle choices, particularly when it occurs in adults. Family members, friends, and even healthcare providers might dismiss someone's food restrictions as being overly selective or attention-seeking. This misunderstanding can prevent people from accessing appropriate treatment and can worsen the shame and isolation that often accompany these conditions. The social consequences of ARFID can be severe, as eating is central to many social activities and cultural practices. CBT shows promise, especially for individuals over age 10, with techniques tailored to reduce anxiety around textures. Behavioral interventions might include systematic desensitization to problematic foods, while family-based interventions help create supportive environments for trying new foods. The key to successful treatment is addressing the underlying sensory processing issues, rather than simply trying to expand food choices through willpower. The restrictive nature of ARFID can lead to significant weight loss, failure to gain weight, and nutritional deficiencies, which can have serious implications for physical and mental health. These consequences often lead to social and emotional distress that compounds the eating difficulties. The physical effects of nutritional deficiencies can include delayed growth in children, hormonal imbalances, and compromised immune function that increases susceptibility to illness. Thousands of adults are struggling with severe nutritional deficiencies, not because they want to be thin, but because their brains process food sensations as threats, creating involuntary barriers to eating that require specialized understanding and therapeutic intervention to overcome. The strong genetic component of ARFID raises important questions about why some people develop these sensory processing differences, while others don't, and what role family history plays in determining who becomes vulnerable to developing restrictive eating patterns when faced with similar environmental pressures. The genetics and environment connection. Scientists have discovered something remarkable about eating disorder inheritance that challenges everything we thought we knew about these conditions. Recent genetic research has revealed that eating disorders are among the most heritable mental health conditions, with some types showing inheritance patterns stronger than many physical diseases. Recent large-scale twin studies in Scandinavia confirm 36% heritability for anorexia, 39% for bulimia, and 30% for ARFID, with ARFID highest at 79%. This means that nearly 80% of the risk for developing ARFID comes from genetic factors rather than environmental influences. The latest research on genetic predisposition shows that eating disorders have substantial heritability across all major types. These numbers mean that between 30% and 40% of the risk for developing these conditions comes directly from inherited genetic factors. Previous research suggested even higher heritability estimates, with some studies showing heritability estimates for anorexia nervosa and bulimia nervosa reaching upwards of 50%. The genetic component is so strong that it rivals the heritability of conditions like diabetes and heart disease. Environmental factors act as powerful triggers that activate genetic vulnerabilities in people who are predisposed to developing eating disorders. The genetic predisposition creates the foundation, but environmental stressors determine whether these genes actually get expressed in problematic ways. Modern life provides an unprecedented number of environmental triggers that can activate dormant genetic vulnerabilities. Social media exposure, diet culture messaging, academic pressure, and family dynamics all serve as potential environmental catalysts that can flip genetic switches. Trauma, stress, and life transitions represent some of the most potent environmental triggers for activating eating disorder genes. Major life changes such as starting college, ending relationships, job loss, or family conflict can create stress levels that overwhelm someone's genetic resilience. The stress response system interacts directly with the genetic pathways involved in eating disorders, creating a biological cascade that can rapidly transform genetic vulnerability into active symptoms. Research has begun to identify specific genetic markers associated with different disorder types, revealing that eating disorders share significant genetic overlap. Anorexia shares a 0.65 genetic correlation with OCD, explaining high comorbidity between these conditions. This genetic connection helps explain why people with eating disorders often struggle with obsessive thoughts, compulsive behaviors, and rigid thinking patterns that extend beyond food and weight concerns. Recent genetic studies have identified promising candidate genes that may play crucial roles in eating disorder development. Whole genome sequencing of families affected by multiple eating disorders has identified the estrogen-related receptor alpha, the SRA, and the histone deacetylase 4, HDAC4, genes as promising candidates for further study. These genes are involved in energy metabolism and gene regulation, suggesting that eating disorders may stem from fundamental differences in how the body processes energy and responds to nutritional signals. Family history creates complex patterns of risk that extend beyond simple genetic inheritance. Studies show that relatives of probans with anorexia have been shown to have an increased risk of eating disorders and subclinical eating disorder behavior. However, family studies suggest a familial vulnerability for eating disorders, but they cannot rule out environmental influences. This means that growing up in a family with eating disorders creates risk through both genetic inheritance and shared environmental factors. The genetic overlap between different eating disorders helps explain why people often transition between different types of disordered eating throughout their lives. A 2019 twin study found a strong genetic overlap between the two disorders, with a genetic correlation of 0.66 between anorexia and bulimia. This genetic connection means that someone who recovers from anorexia might be at increased risk for developing bulimia later, not because of psychological factors alone, but because of shared genetic vulnerabilities. Epigenetics plays a crucial role in eating disorder development by determining how genetic predisposition gets expressed in response to environmental factors. Epigenetic changes can occur when environmental stressors alter gene expression without changing the underlying DNA sequence. These changes can be triggered by trauma, chronic stress, nutritional deficiencies, or other environmental factors. The epigenetic modifications can then influence how genes related to appetite regulation, stress response, and reward processing function. Modern stressors interact with genetic predisposition in ways that previous generations never experienced. The constant connectivity of social media, the pressure for optimization and productivity, and the abundance of diet culture messaging create environmental conditions that can activate genetic vulnerabilities more readily than ever before. These modern triggers can overwhelm the protective factors that might have prevented genetic predisposition from developing into active disorders in previous generations. The research shows that binge eating disorder is also moderately heritable, with about 45% of the risk explained by genetic factors. This finding demonstrates that genetic factors contribute more to binge eating disorder risk than environmental factors, which contributed 13% to the risk, making genetics a greater risk factor than the environment. This research challenges the assumption that binge eating disorders are primarily caused by external factors like stress or trauma. Understanding why some people develop eating disorders, while others in similar environments don't, requires examining the complex interaction between genetic vulnerability and environmental resilience. People with stronger genetic predisposition may develop eating disorders, even in relatively supportive environments, while those with lower genetic risk might remain healthy despite exposure to significant environmental stressors. The presence of protective factors such as strong social support, healthy coping mechanisms, and access to mental health resources can help buffer genetic vulnerabilities. The strength of genetic influence varies across different eating disorder presentations, with some types showing stronger heritability than others. The research indicates that genetic factors play particularly strong roles in restrictive eating disorders, while environmental factors may have greater influence in other presentations. Understanding these differences helps explain why some people respond better to certain treatments, and why recovery timelines vary so dramatically between individuals. Your genes load the gun, but modern life pulls the trigger, and 2025 research shows that social media exposure, optimization culture, and chronic stress represent the most dangerous environmental factors for activating genetic vulnerabilities that transform inherited predisposition into active eating disorder symptoms. But when researchers examined exactly who was developing these genetically influenced conditions, they discovered patterns that completely shattered every assumption about which groups were most at risk. Demographics and surprising affected groups. Data shows adults 35 to 50 with OSFT increasing fastest in recent years, representing a demographic shift that has completely overturned traditional assumptions about who develops eating disorders. The stereotype of the young, white, affluent female struggling with anorexia represents less than 15% of current cases. Instead, eating disorders now affect people across all age groups, ethnicities, socioeconomic levels, and gender identities at rates that would have been unimaginable just a decade ago. The most striking demographic change involves men, who now account for 39.5% of OSFT cases, according to recent studies. This represents a fundamental shift in how eating disorders manifest across gender lines. Male presentations often center around muscle obsession, performance enhancement, and control-seeking behaviors that are praised as examples of masculine discipline rather than recognized as symptoms of psychological distress. The behaviors typically involve rigid meal timing, excessive exercise, and supplement dependence rather than traditional restriction patterns that healthcare providers are trained to identify. Midlife adults aged 35 to 50 are developing eating disorders for the first time during major life transitions, often presenting with optimization-focused disorders that stem from career stress, parenting pressures, and aging-related anxiety. These individuals frequently maintain normal weights while engaging in complex food rules and restriction patterns that significantly impact their quality of life. They might eat regularly in social situations, but privately follow rigid protocols about meal timing, food combinations, or caloric distribution that create significant psychological distress. Socioeconomic factors create unique pathways to eating disorder development that contradict assumptions about these conditions primarily affecting affluent populations. Lower-income individuals face food insecurity that can trigger restrictive eating patterns, but they also experience different types of food obsession related to maximizing nutritional value with limited resources. The stress of financial instability can lead to control-seeking behaviors around food that provide a sense of agency in otherwise chaotic circumstances. Higher-income individuals develop eating disorders through different mechanisms, often related to access to wellness culture, personal trainers, and optimization technologies. These presentations frequently involve expensive supplements, boutique fitness programs, and sophisticated tracking devices that enable complex restriction patterns. The financial resources available to this demographic allow for more elaborate and potentially dangerous eating disorder behaviors that can be sustained for longer periods without immediate consequences. Cultural background plays a crucial role in how eating disorders develop and get recognized within different communities. Research confirms that eating disorders are not new disorders and, despite myths to the contrary, do not affect only white adolescent females. However, cultural factors influence symptom presentation in ways that can make diagnosis challenging. Some cultures have strong traditions around food restriction for religious or spiritual purposes, which can mask pathological eating behaviors. Other cultures emphasize body ideals that differ from Western standards, leading to eating disorders that focus on different physical attributes. LGBTQ+ individuals face elevated eating disorder risks due to minority stress, discrimination, and body dysphoria that can extend beyond typical appearance concerns. Studies indicate that sexual and gender minorities experience eating disorders at rates significantly higher than their heterosexual and cisgender counterparts. Gender dysphoria can contribute to eating disorder development as individuals attempt to modify their bodies to align with their gender identity. The intersection of gender identity exploration with eating disorder symptoms creates complex treatment challenges that require specialized approaches. The intersection of eating disorders with other mental health conditions creates complex diagnostic and treatment challenges. Research reveals that up to 23% of individuals with binge eating disorder had attempted suicide, and nearly all 94% reported lifetime mental health symptoms, including mood disorders at 70%, substance use disorders at 68%, anxiety disorders at 59%, borderline personality disorder at 49%, and post-traumatic stress disorder at 32%. These high rates of comorbidity mean that eating disorders rarely occur in isolation, but instead develop alongside other psychological conditions that complicate both diagnosis and treatment. Life transitions and major stressors act as powerful triggers for eating disorder onset across all demographic groups. College enrollment, job changes, relationship transitions, parenthood, and health diagnoses can all precipitate eating disorder development in previously stable individuals. The stress of major life changes can overwhelm existing coping mechanisms, leading people to seek control through food-related behaviors that initially provide relief, but quickly become compulsive and harmful. Veterans and athletes now show elevated eating disorder rates, but stereotypes keep them underdiagnosed. Studies show that up to 18.5% of female veterans and 8.5% of male veterans screen positive for eating disorders, highlighting the unique challenges they face during and after military service. The transition from military to civilian life, combined with trauma exposure and identity shifts, creates vulnerabilities that can manifest as eating disorder symptoms. Athletes across all levels and sports demonstrate increased eating disorder vulnerability due to performance pressures and body-focused training cultures. Healthcare workers themselves face elevated risks due to their exposure to medical information, shift work schedules, and high-stress environments. The combination of medical knowledge about nutrition and body systems with chronic stress can lead to optimization-focused eating disorders that appear healthy to colleagues, but cause significant psychological distress. The professional demands of healthcare work, combined with constant exposure to health information, create unique vulnerabilities that can trigger obsessive behaviors around food and body management. The economic impact of eating disorders reflects their widespread prevalence across demographic groups. Eating disorders are described worldwide and are responsible for health care and disability-related costs that are estimated to total $400 billion annually in the US, indicating the massive scope of these conditions across society. This economic burden demonstrates that eating disorders affect not just individuals and families, but entire communities and healthcare systems. The face of eating disorders in 2025 looks nothing like the stereotypes, encompassing diverse populations across all age groups, ethnicities, socioeconomic levels, and life circumstances. These conditions now affect groups that were previously thought to be immune, creating an urgent need for healthcare providers to recognize symptoms across all demographics. The widespread nature of these conditions means that effective treatment approaches must be developed and made accessible to address this growing public health crisis. Treatment outcomes and recovery statistics. Recovery from eating disorders is not only possible, but more achievable than ever before when people receive proper diagnosis and appropriate treatment. The 2025 data reveals significant improvements in treatment outcomes across all disorder types, with success rates that would have been unimaginable just a decade ago. These improvements stem from better understanding of how different eating disorders develop and respond to treatment, leading to more targeted and effective effective therapeutic approaches. CBT is first line for all EDs, leading to 50 to 75% remission rates, depending on disorder type. Enhanced cognitive behavior therapy has emerged as the gold standard based on extensive research demonstrating its effectiveness across all eating disorder presentations. This approach adapts traditional cognitive behavioral therapy specifically for eating disorder symptoms, addressing the unique thought patterns and behaviors that maintain these conditions. CBT works by helping people identify and change the thoughts and behaviors that perpetuate their eating disorders, while also addressing the underlying psychological factors that contribute to these conditions. Evidence-based treatments like CBT and family-based therapy show strong results. CBT resolves core ED behaviors in half of binge eating cases. The treatment approach varies significantly depending on the specific disorder type, with CBT typically requiring more sessions for anorexia nervosa compared to bulimia nervosa and binge eating disorders, reflecting the complexity and severity of restrictive eating patterns. Family-based treatment remains the most promising approach for children and adolescents with anorexia nervosa, involving family members directly in the recovery process to create supportive home environments that facilitate healing. Early intervention dramatically improves outcomes across all eating disorder types, with research consistently showing that individuals who receive treatment early in the course of their disorder have significantly higher recovery rates. The difference between early and delayed treatment can be substantial, with some studies showing recovery rates that are 2 to 3 times higher when treatment begins within the first year of symptom onset. This finding underscores the critical importance of recognizing eating disorder symptoms quickly and accessing specialized care as soon as possible. Treatment has evolved significantly to address technology-related triggers that contribute to modern eating disorder presentations. Healthcare providers now recognize the significant impact of social media and diet or fitness apps on disordered eating symptomology, leading to treatment approaches that specifically address these digital influences. The curated and often unrealistic portrayals of beauty and fitness shared online can pave the way for negative self-comparisons, low self-esteem, and disordered eating behaviors, requiring therapeutic interventions that help people develop healthy relationships with technology. Treatment approaches now include specific strategies for managing technology-related triggers, such as social media detoxes, app usage monitoring, and developing critical thinking skills about online content. Therapists work with clients to identify specific digital triggers and develop coping strategies for managing exposure to potentially harmful content. This might involve unfollowing certain accounts, using app timers, or developing alternative activities to replace compulsive social media use. Family and social support play crucial roles in eating disorder recovery, with research consistently showing that strong support systems significantly improve treatment outcomes. Family-based treatment approaches recognize that eating disorders affect entire family systems, not just individual patients. These interventions help family members understand the nature of eating disorders, learn how to provide appropriate support, and address family dynamics that might contribute to or maintain disordered eating behaviors. The coordinated interprofessional team effort involving a clinician, a nutritionist, a psychotherapist, a psychiatrist, nurses, exercise therapist, occupational therapist, pharmacist, and social worker enhances patient care in eating disorders. This comprehensive approach addresses the multiple aspects of eating disorders, from medical complications to psychological factors to nutritional rehabilitation. Each team member brings specialized expertise that contributes to the overall treatment plan. Recovery from bulimia nervosa typically occurs earlier than anorexia nervosa, with the majority of individuals with bulimia nervosa recovering within 9 to 10 years, while only 50% of individuals with anorexia nervosa recover within the same timeframe. These statistics reflect the complexity of anorexia nervosa and the challenges associated with weight restoration and psychological recovery. Realistic expectations about recovery involve understanding that eating disorders are chronic conditions that require ongoing management rather than quick fixes. Addressing underlying trauma significantly improves eating disorder outcomes, with enhanced cognitive behavior therapy and family-based treatment also recommended for anorexia nervosa. Many eating disorders develop as coping mechanisms for traumatic experiences, making trauma-informed treatment approaches essential for long-term recovery. These interventions help people process traumatic experiences, while developing healthier coping strategies that don't involve disordered eating behaviors. Early treatment and aggressive multidisciplinary interventions increase the chances of success and lower the likelihood of relapse. The intensive nature of comprehensive treatment reflects the serious and complex nature of eating disorders, but also demonstrates the commitment of the healthcare system to providing effective care for these conditions. Despite the rising prevalence of eating disorders, 2025 treatment outcomes are better than ever, but only for those who get properly diagnosed and receive appropriate care from specialized treatment teams that understand the complex nature of these conditions. The challenge isn't that effective treatments don't exist. It's that most people struggling with eating disorders never receive proper diagnosis because their symptoms are hidden behind the language of wellness and optimization, leaving millions suffering in silence while their behaviors are celebrated rather than treated. The scope of this epidemic extends far beyond what official statistics capture. Nearly 1 in 6 adults now struggles with eating disorders, with ARFID representing the majority of cases and Dubelmia creating life-threatening risks through medication misuse. These conditions hide behind wellness culture and optimization language, making recognition challenging but essential. If you recognize rigid food rules, anxiety around eating, or obsessive tracking behaviors in yourself or others, these aren't lifestyle choices requiring more willpower. They're symptoms of serious psychological conditions that respond well to professional treatment. Recovery begins with proper diagnosis. Use NADA's online screening tool and crisis text line NADA to 741741.